Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is September 30th, last day of the month, last day of summer in my book. I can't believe it. All right, well, today in botanical history, we celebrate an Old English poet, a Mexican botanist, and a British gardener and survivalist who was way ahead of his time. And we'll hear an excerpt from a beautiful Jack Gilbert poem. I think you'll like that. And then we grow that garden library today with a garden classic of our time from a contemporary garden expert. And then we'll wrap things up with a fun movie that featured a botanist. And it debuted 6 years ago today in England. In fact, I can remember seeing this movie with my husband on a date night. We used to do that all the time. Go to movies. Of course, this was all before the pandemic. And we had little kids still at home, and my, how times have changed in just 6 short years. Crazy. And you know what? Speaking of crazy, here's today's curated news. All right, today's curated news asks a crazy question, and here it is. Is a coconut a fruit, a nut, or a seed? Well, we turn to the Library of Congress for our answer. They provided us with today's curated news. And actually, the answer is that it is all three. Isn't that crazy? So it turns out that botanically speaking, a coconut is a fibrous, one-seeded drupe, which is a fruit with a hard, stony covering that encloses a seed. And then the seed is the reproductive unit of a flowering plant. And from a reproductive viewpoint, in the coconut's case, the endosperm of the seed of the coconut is the white stuff. That's the stuff that we eat. And yay for that white stuff. I happen to love 7-layer bars, and I can't imagine 7-layer bars without coconut. To me, they really make the 7-layer bars, so gotta have coconut. And then finally, you have the word coconut, which has the word nut in it, which can also be a little bit misleading. But here in the article, they say that a loose definition of nut is a one-seeded fruit. So that is how, yes, a coconut could be described as a nut. So there you go, a little trivia to start out the Daily Gardener today. All right, it's time for today's botanical history. Here's botanical history for today, September 30th. Today we start out with the death of Henry King. He died on this day in 1669, and he was an English poet, a bishop, and close friends with John Donne. If you remember John Donne, he's the man who said, "No man is an island." Anyway, Henry King wrote a little verse about flowers that I thought you would like, and he admired them. He wrote, "Brave flowers, that I could gallant it like you, and be as little vain. You come abroad and make a harmless show, and to your beds again. You are not proud, you know your birth, for your embroidered garments are from earth." Great little verse. And today we wish a heavenly happy birthday to Helia Bravo Hollis, the Mexican botanist who was born on this day 120 years ago today in 1901. Helia was the very first woman to graduate with a degree in biology in Mexico. And by 29, she was serving as curator of the herbarium in Mexico City for the university there, where she studied cacti. And her work brought her notoriety with other botanists and with other scientists throughout the world. And she became known as the Queen of the Cacti. Her masterpiece is a book that she co-wrote. It was called The Cactus of Mexico. And in 1951, she co-founded the Mexican Cactus Society, which planned to celebrate her 100th birthday in the year 2001. But sadly, she died just 4 days short of her century birthday. But she did manage to have this highlight. In 1980, Monaco's Grace Kelly, who was also fond of cacti, presented Helia with the second ever Golden Cactus Award. I didn't even know this existed. And here she got the second one. And it was an award that she treasured. And of course she would. Well, when she wasn't busy working with cactus, she had her botanical gardens in Mexico City that she helped found, and she served as the director of them all through the 1960s. And there was a great little story that I found out about her during her time as director. Apparently, a strike had occurred at the gardens, and when this was happening, Helia offset her workers' lost wages with her own savings. She was a very kind and considerate woman. In 2018, Google commemorated her birthday with a Google Doodle for her 117th birthday. Now, if you look for Helia online, you will see a memorable photo of her. She's dressed in a skirt and blazer, very appropriately, but she's got a knife in one hand, and she's standing next to a giant barrel cactus. Now, in Mexico, where the giant barrel cactus is native, the hairs are harvested for weaving, and they make a traditional candy from boiling the pith. Who knew? Well, today, Helia is remembered in the Helia Bravo Hollis Botanical Garden, which features more than 80 species of cactus. And Helia once wrote these words: "My reason for living is biology and cacti." Sounds like something a botanist would say. And today is the birth of Edward Solomon Hyams. He was born on this day in 1910, and he was a British gardener, a French scholar, a historian, an anarchist, and a writer. And he was also a gardening correspondent for the Illustrated London News and The Spectator, as well as various horticultural journals. Now, when I read about Edward, I feel like he was ahead of his time. He should have probably been born about 50 years later, but sadly he wasn't. But anyway, after World War II, he decided to live completely self-sufficiently, and he did this at a little place called Nut Tree Cottages in Kent. Now, while he was doing this, he became an expert on grapes, and he decided to plant a small vineyard. And this led to his book called The Grapevine in England, which was published in 1949. The following year, he wrote From the Wasteland. It was something that maybe a nod to the T.S. Eliot poem, I'm not sure. But this book came out in 1950, and it described his transformation of those 3 acres at Nut Tree Cottages into a market garden that not only generated food, but income. Now, doesn't that sound like something that people are doing right now, nowadays? Taking back the land, finding their own little place of Eden, and either rewilding it or turning it into a market garden. Well, in any case, one of Edward's most well-known books is called The Gardener's Bedside Book. He wrote it in 1968. You might have heard about it. You might actually have a copy of it by your bedside. But I thought I would share a little excerpt with you so that you get a little feel for the way Edward wrote. Here's something he wrote about hybrid tulips. He wrote, "I have never been interested in and am incapable of writing about the great hybrid garden tulips. I do not mean to condemn them or anything foolish like that, but one cannot be interested in every kind of garden plant, and that particular kind has never made any real appeal to me whatsoever. But the botanical species tulips are quite another matter. Oh, Edward, now we're talking, huh? All right, it's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's Unearthed Words come to us from Jack Gilbert. This is from his book, The Dance Most of All. It's a book of poetry, and this is a little excerpt from his poem called Ovid in Tears. Love is like a garden in the heart, he said. They asked him what he meant by garden. He explained about gardens. In the cities, he said, there are places walled off where color and decorum are magnified into a civilization. Like a beautiful woman, he said. How like a woman, they asked. He remembered their wives and said garden was just a figure of speech, then called for drinks all around. 2 rounds later, he was crying. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Windcliff by Daniel J. Hinckley. And if you're in the Facebook group, you will notice that I included that video, that lecture by Dan Hinckley. He was talking about Windcliff, and I thought it was spectacular, so I hope you get a chance to listen to it. Anyway, this book about Windcliff came out in 2020, and the subtitle is A Story of People, Plants, and Gardens. In this book, we learn about Windcliff, one of 2 magnificent gardens created by the plantsman, nurseryman, and plant hunter Dan Hinckley. And Dan also created Heronswood. And here's what the publisher said about this book. These iconic gardens and the story of how one gave rise to the other are celebrated in Hinckley's deeply personal Windcliff in a lively style that mingles audacious opinions on garden design with cautionary tales of plant missteps. Hinckley shares his infectious passion for plants. And I have to say that comes through loud and clear in that video and this book. In these pages, you will fall in love with Windcliff thanks to the gorgeous photography, and then you'll fall even deeper in love hearing about the careful way that Dan created Windcliff, from the exceptional plants that he selected to his pragmatic garden advice. This book is 280 pages of creating a garden with a modern master who loves plants and is delighted to share his stunning garden with us, and we are all the better for it. You can get a copy of Windcliff by Daniel J. Hinckley and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $22. And I tell you what, if you are trying to grow your own garden library, Windcliff should definitely be part of it. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. And Max apparently agrees. If you can hear him there in the background, he's going a little crazy right now. Anyway, it was on this day, September 30th in 2015, that The Martian, featuring Matt Damon as botanist Mark Watney, premiered in England. In the movie, Mark is accidentally left on Mars and is forced to grow potatoes to stay alive until he is rescued. And that's all I'm going to tell you about it. If you haven't seen it, you'll definitely want to add it to your watch list. And I did go ahead and check, and it is on Netflix, so you can easily find it there. And now I am going to play with this dog. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove and Wyoming, Minnesota. If you want to read today's show notes, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can always get in touch by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.